Hello, friends. I'd like to share a story that goes back to an era when Nirmal and I lived in India. And as we learned the hard way over there, it's always good to have a backup plan, or in our case, several backup plans. And what I mean by that is that sometimes the power would go off. In fact, rather frequently the power went off. Here in the West, it can make the news if the power goes off in a city, or if there's a widespread power outage. But in India, the development of neighborhoods and the need for electricity outstripped the ability to produce and deliver it reliably, and so there would be outages. And so we created a backup plan, and the first backup plan was simply to have our own generator so we could generate our own power. And that was a whole story in itself, because I sort of underestimated the amount of power that we would ultimately need in my efforts to economize on the generator, which ended up being kind of counterproductive. But anyway, we did have a backup plan. We did have a generator. So the next level of it, we were able to build into our lives more as we moved to a different location, which is we created a battery backup for the generator, because the generator wasn't always going to work. And in the first house that we shifted to after the second house that we lived in after the first one, the generator did not come on automatically. So that meant if the power went off, and I noticed that it went off, which I would if the air conditioning was running and then suddenly it was off in the nighttime, that would wake me up, I would go outside and I would turn on the generator. Well, we created a battery backup to allow the air conditioners to continue to run for a while until the generator got started. And this was an enormous physical pile of batteries. These things were huge, and they were 12 volts each, and we had 16 of them, and anyway, they were enormous. Took up larger than the couch that I'm sitting on. In fact, 2 or 3 of the couches that I'm sitting on. So anyway, that was the backup to the backup. But then what we realized is that we had to, because the battery backup could also have trouble and need to be serviced and maintained from time to time, more so than we actually initially thought. So then we had smaller backups related to Swami Kriyananda's computer, and our own computers had their own batteries. Anyway, so we sort of had backups to backups to backups to backups, and ultimately it came down to the fact that we were all using laptops, and the laptops themselves had internal batteries as well. So that was like the final, 2 hours worth of backup. But I say all of that, I tell all of that story because it's just wise in life to have backup plans, because it's almost inevitable that something that we depend on, such as electricity, will fail at some point. There'll be a big storm, there'll be a big fire, where we have fires. It seems like we have fires more often in California, forest fires, than big storms, but that changes by the season. But in any case, disruptions happen. We're on a flight, it gets diverted, or it's not able to take off because of some problem, and then we have to shift for ourselves and figure out where to go. And the ability to be flexible, the ability to respond in the moment, the ability to a fallback plan, a different approach, a different way of doing the same thing. All of these are very, very helpful. And they kind of come under the heading of practical spirituality, which I think will be the name of a different video. But take a moment to look through your life, look through the daily life that you have, and try to imagine, what if this went away? What if that went away? Would I still be centered? Would I still feel like I was able to function, able to do what is required of me in life? And if you find yourself kind of leaning on something dependently, I'll just give an example from my own life. I used to really like coffee, and I have to say I still really like coffee. But coffee doesn't always like me, and so I've decided I didn't really feel like being addicted to coffee. But I remember having the ability to make my own coffee, and I schlepped this all around the world. I had this little cute pot, dual voltage espresso maker. I could bring this thing to basically any country in the world and plug it in, and I would bring my own little stash of coffee. And, I had the thing with me. That was my plan. If good coffee wasn't available, and it's not available everywhere, then I had my little backup plan. But ultimately I realized, I just don't really want to be dependent on that. I didn't want to be dependent on this caffeine burst. It's kind of like fake energy. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to get off of coffee, which I did. And for the last several years, I've been off of coffee. I still have decaf once in a while. But look through and see, what are you dependent on? What are you willing to be dependent on? Ultimately, we have to depend on God. God is the backup plan that has no end. And if we do depend on God, then we can find a way to work with whatever comes to us in life.